What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be taking a quick look at the major features that are behind Bitwig 4.3. I've got some really cool sounds to show you, and I also have a couple of suggestions in hopes that Bitwig adds them to future releases. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to like and subscribe, as I do all things Bitwig, faceplant, kilohearts, neurobase, drums, XYZ, experimental music, yeah, all that stuff. And yeah, hopefully you'll learn something by the end of the video and see if the upgrade is worth it to you or not. It's definitely worth it to me, and I'll show you why. So let's start off with the newest addition of the oscillator section, which is within Polymer, called the Union oscillator. And it pretty much is a waveform combiner from a square, saw, and triangle that allows you to create your own waveforms, kind of like this. As you can tell, it has a really large analog feel, and that's something that I really like about it in particular, because if you're trying to do very quick and dirty respaces, maybe something kind of like this, then all you have to do is add a little bit of voice stacking, and there you go, you got something nice and fat. They've also added a saw wave sub oscillator, so using this in conjunction with the whatever we just made can give you an even better result. And then if you add a little bit of FM to this, then suddenly by just tweaking a couple of knobs, you can see that you end up getting some really strong and powerful sounds. So with that being said, we've also got a new Moog style filter that just, well, it sounds really fat and is the typical, I guess, algorithm of what's behind that classic synthesizer. And that sounds like this. This is great for adding resonance, and you can make an acid type sound. And you can see that Polymer really plays to that analog feel with using a really strong source sound. And so this is a really cool addition, and there's a couple of other changes that have been made between the Salon key change, I'm not sure what it was from before, and then also the comb filter. But one thing that I would like to see for an update within Bitwig is the ability to have different like modules be movable or be replaceable, or at least like maybe add a distortion module that we can kind of add to that before we can right click and transition into our polygrid. But this does bring up another problem that I also think is important to mention. While I do think that there are some amazing devices within Bitwig, you kind of have to fish for them. For example, we've got all these different filter types within this and Polymer, but if you pull up a regular filter and you right click, there's no other options to change between some of these that are really amazing. And the only way to access them is by using the grid, Polymer, or the effects grid. And the same goes with distortion, and I'm kind of wondering like if there's a possibility to be able to implement that within a future iteration. So aside from that though, the sounds themselves are really fine and dandy, but the biggest stuff that we have is these two guys right here, which is an immense change to how I go about designing spaces and sounds and time, no pun intended. The convolution reverb that is within Bitwig is definitely my favorite addition to the 4.3 update, just because of, well, how it sounds. So if I were to maybe turn this into a key or so with a pluck, I mean, look how wide that is. It sounds amazing. Now, I will definitely say that they did an amazing job of having a source impulse that sounds great, but the cool thing is that you can implement a classic reverb, kind of like so, and add this into your wet effects here, and now you've got this combination, kind of like your hybrid or reverb or something of the sort, to where you've got a little bit of digital and then also your convolution to be working with each other in that way. So you can also change this vice versa. So if I wanted to pull this out and then throw this into the wet effects, and by nature most of Bitwig's devices have that ability, then you can see that you can create custom devices to where only the wet signal is being affected, and ultimately create like very unique sounds from that. You can implement your own impulses via here, so you can just go and find whatever sample pack you're using, or I just kind of have everything up here because everything is an impulse to me. But you can also do some really cool options like shape the overall size of the sample itself. This is really cool because sometimes you might want to shorten or make things longer that is independent of the pitch. And the thing with this though is that you cannot reverse the sample, and then also you can't automate the tune, which is something I hope that they add. I know that it requires a crazy amount of processing in CPU to be able to do that, but unfortunately we can't add like an LFO to the tuning. You can add it to the brightness or the darkness of this, which is definitely cool, but that's something that I would like to see available within this in particular. The other thing is that in order for you to reverse the sample, you have to drag the sample into the timeline and reverse it and then throw that in, or reverse all your impulses. So I think that's a pretty easy thing that would be nice to implement, of just like have like an R right there and toggle that, so that way you can reverse all that stuff. But it sounds amazing, and I really enjoy using this. It's something that I've implemented on every track that I've started since then, and it just sounds awesome. We are getting a little bit of distortion just from the sheer amount of like stacking that these harmonics are creating, but in that sense, I definitely think that for physical modeling, for designing cool spaces, for designing just weird and wonky stuff, convolution is the way to go. And I'm so glad that Bitwig finally added that to the effect arsenal. Now the other thing is actually just as versatile. It's not necessarily my favorite, but not because it's bad, it's just because well, convolution is my jam. But with this, we have a lot of unique features that no other delay device within Bitwig has. So one big thing is that we now have this diffusion kind of style option, to where you can kind of create reverb within the delay itself. And it's not really exactly what's happening, but if you take a listen, and then maybe we turn this up just a little bit. You can see that not only is it creating a really nice and wide delay, but it's also kind of giving that diffusion that sounds really nice. So from pulling this back, we also have some really nice clipping that is within the delay option itself. You click on here and look over in this direction. We've got soft, hard, and compression styles. And this is great because a lot of times whenever you stack delays, it can be very easy to go overboard and create like really harsh sounding tones, or to like blow your speakers up. So it's really cool that they kept that in mind. For somebody like me, because I have tinnitus probably from stacking too many delays at one point in time or another in headphones. Now with that though, we also have a ducking feature, and this will allow you to kind of cut the signal out or cut the delay out until the original source stops playing. So if I have something here, and let's say I've got this huge wide delay with tons of feedback on this, we're not going to hear anything until the actual signal ends. And it's kind of nice that it cleans all that up until it's done, so that way you have a very dry source, and then it opens that up. We've got a few different modes that you can select through here, so I encourage you to check those all out. And then over here we have mono, stereo, left ping, and right ping. So just some really cool options that you can use to mess with. Some nice kind of like stereo sounding things. Now the other thing that I want to talk about is over on the left we have fade and repitch, and fade is the current mode that we have now. So if I were to change the time mid, I guess, delay, you can see that it doesn't affect the pitch, whereas if we change this to the repitch mode, it's going to kind of do that like almost DJ scratching vinyl type thing. And sometimes that can be cool, but just knowing that we have the option now is really cool. The other thing too is that I really like that we have this slider over here that will transition between a regular, I guess, tempo or a regular time signature mode, where if we slide it over to the left, it becomes dotted, and then if we slide over to the right, I believe it's triplets. But within that, it's just more diverse stuff that we can make. Now, this isn't necessarily new to Bitwig, but as I said before, with the feedback and the wet effects, this is a great tool to do like really crazy sound design, because if you were to send something like a crazy generative effects rack here that I have with all of these different things, and then we send a signal into it, then you end up getting some crazy stuff, kind of like this. Then if you go and add that convolution on back of it, you get some really crazy monster soundscapey things. And suddenly we've created a horror movie. So these offer a lot more diversity between manipulating time and space, and that's kind of why the theme of the update was called such. But there's one more thing that I want to show you that I think that you'll really enjoy, and we'll take a look at that now. You have the ability to send, or feedback rather, effect tracks into themselves, and that is a lot of power, but it's also potentially dangerous, so be very careful when you do this. Maybe turn down the master or add a bunch of clippers and limiters that are constantly turning the volume down, because this is a very quick way to hurt your ears or your speakers. But as you can see, I've got my own personal favorite clipper, and then I've got a limiter attached to this. But what we're going to do is turn this on, and this is just a bunch of effects that I've thrown on here, but we're going to take Polymer and send that into effect 1. Now if we were to just play this, then we're going to get some weird wonky effects. So take a listen. Let's go ahead and turn this one on too. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo this, and then I'm going to slowly start to turn this up, and you'll see how this starts to affect the sound. And you can see that by feedbacking this into itself and potentially more effect tracks and stuff, you can end up getting some really insane results. Now again, you want to be very careful with how you do this, because when you start to feedback this stuff too much, you can either shut down your engine, like I've done several times trying to film this video from the past, or again, just creating a sound that is very detrimental to you and your listening environment's ears. Trying to protect my partner who's currently working. You can definitely blow sounds up, and you definitely want to be careful. I cannot stress that enough. But it's an amazing sound design tool that you can set up just as long as you put those parameters in. So with that being said, again, we kind of have that new oscillator from the Unison. We've got the new Convolution reverb, which I highly recommend that you update just for that. The delay plus is really awesome, especially when you start to think about doing the feedback effects and messing around with all the parameters within that. And then there's a couple of other changes that are within the grid, for example, the new Moog filter and whatnot. But again, in the future, gosh, I can't talk, I would like to see those updates happen to all of the other devices as well, specifically with the filters and distortion. So yeah, with that, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you guys learned something cool. And if you guys send something, or if you make something rather, that's really interesting, then show me on the Discord or tag me in your videos. Thanks guys, I'll see you in the next one.